Tonight, we are going to navigate the unseen threads of justice and the strange, often impossible rhythms of the past. Let your eyes grow heavy as we begin our journey. We find ourselves drifting back to the year 1938. The place is Oklahoma City, a landscape caught in the weary grip of the Great Depression. It is a December night, but the air carries a strange, lingering humidity that feels more like a damp autumn than the onset of winter. The sky is a heavy blanket of charcoal gray, and the scent of wood smoke hangs thick and low over the neighborhoods. In the distance, you can hear the faint, metallic clatter of a streetcar moving along its iron tracks, a lonely sound that echoes through the mist. This was a city trying to sleep through hard times, a place where the flickering yellow glow of street lamps struggled to pierce the gloom. Imagine the texture of a 1930s street in the heart of Oklahoma. The ground beneath your feet is a patchwork of worn cobblestones and cracked asphalt, slick with a fine sheen of cold moisture. The mist clings to the iron fences of the small, wood-framed houses, turning every shadow into something soft and indistinct. There is a specific smell to this era, a mixture of coal dust, wet wool, and the faint, sweet aroma of cedar burning in a kitchen stove. The houses are huddled close together, their porches narrow and their windows dim, reflecting a world where privacy was a luxury and neighbors lived within the sound of each other's voices. As you walk down Chickasaw Avenue, the silence is heavy, broken only by the occasional bark of a distant dog or the soft hiss of the damp wind through the bare branches of the elms. The street lamps are few and far between, casting long, wavering pools of amber light that don't quite reach the dark corners of the alleys. You can see the silhouettes of the old Ford Model Ts and Chevrolets parked along the curbs, their rounded fenders gleaming dully in the rain. Everything feels dampened, muted, as if the city itself is holding its breath. It is in this atmosphere of quiet desperation and shadowed corners that our first impossible story begins to take shape. We are looking for the answer to a question that seems to defy logic. How can a man be in two places at once? How can a prisoner, locked away under the watchful eyes of guards, leave his post, commit a daring crime miles away, and return to his bunk before the morning count? It sounds like a ghost story, a trick of the light, or a lapse in the fabric of reality. Yet, in the archives of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, the name Joe Crowe remains a testament to the impossible. We will find these answers as the night deepens and the rain continues its steady, lulling beat. Think about the concept of a secret field trip. It implies a sense of wonder, a temporary escape from the mundane. But for a convict in 1938, an unauthorized journey was a dance with the abyss. We will explore the dam project near Fort Towson, where the water of the river ran gray and slow, and where the trust between a guard and a prisoner was a fragile, invisible thread. We will follow the tire tracks across the border into Paris, Texas, feeling the rhythm of the road beneath us and the stolen wind against our faces. It is a story of calm irony, where the very system designed to contain a man became the vehicle for his temporary freedom. As we move through these chapters, you might feel a sense of quiet curiosity. You might wonder about the man known as Apache Joe, who lived in a trailer and claimed that a diet of rattlesnakes kept him forever young. You might visualize the small, one-room house on Chickasaw Avenue, where a kerosene lamp flickered against the walls and a secret was hidden in the smoke of a gun. These details are the anchors of our journey tonight. They are the mundane textures that make the impossible feel real. We're not just hearing facts. We are feeling the draft under the door and smelling the boiled coffee on the stove. The world of 1938 was a place of hard edges and soft hearts. It was a time when 10 chickens were worth a year of a man's life, and a homemade mousetrap could be the most sophisticated security system on a Nebraska farm. We will visit the Stubblefield farm, hearing the Nebraska wind howl over the chicken coop and the sudden, metallic snap of a spring that changed a man's destiny. There is a nostalgic justice in these stories, a sense that even in the darkest times, the truth has a way of ringing out like a bell in the middle of the night. Later, we will transition into the 1970s, moving from the dusty plains to the citrus groves of Florida. We will sit on the porch with Zellie Riley, a man of immense dignity and quiet strength, unaware that the neighbor he shared a fence with was watching him with cold, calculated intent. We will reflect on the final meal of James Dupree Henry, a dozen oysters, tasted for the first time just as the shore of life was fading from view. And we will witness the moment a mother and son were reunited in the shadow of the electric chair, a bond restored just as the state prepared to sever it. These stories are interconnected by the unseen threads of justice. They remind us that the past is never truly gone. It is simply waiting for us to listen. The earth itself holds these memories, from the redwoods of Santa Cruz to the nightclubs of Tahlequah. Whether it is a plumber with a deadly secret or a man who believed he could bargain with the ground beneath his feet, the rhythms of these lives continue to echo. But for now, your only task is to listen. Let the details drift past you like leaves on a slow-moving stream. The stories are beginning, but the world is safe. You are tucked away in the dark, protected by the rain and the silence. As we move into the first case, let your breathing slow down. Match your pulse to the steady drip of the water from the eaves. We are traveling back to Chickasaw Avenue now. We are going to stand in the mist and watch the light flicker in a window that no longer exists. The night is long, and the path is clear. We are going to find the truth together, one quiet step at a time. Sleep is coming. But first, there is a story that needs to be told. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. It is always a comfort to know how far these quiet words travel across the miles while the rest of the world is finding its rest. I want you to take a moment now to acknowledge the weight of the day. Let it settle. Feel the mattress supporting you. The screen before you is dark, and the only light is the soft glow of your imagination. Outside, the rain is tapping against the window pane with a steady, rhythmic cadence. It is a sound that has remained unchanged for centuries. It is the same rain that fell on the cobblestones of 1938, washing away the dust of the day and bringing a cool, heavy stillness to the air. You are safe here. You are protected by the shadows and the soft hum of the night. The night is quiet. The rain is falling. The air in Oklahoma City carries the weight of a decade of struggle. We are standing on the corner of a street that has seen the world change, Yet tonight, it feels as though time has stopped altogether. The year is 1938. The month is December. In Oklahoma City, the air should be biting and sharp, but tonight it is strangely soft. It is a humidity that feels more like a lingering autumn than the start of winter. The smell of wood smoke hangs low in the streets, drifting from the chimneys of small houses where families are huddled together against the uncertainty of the era. The Great Depression has left its mark on every brick and every face. You can feel it in the quiet desperation of the streets, but also in the profound resilience of the people who call this place home. There is a distant hum of a city trying to sleep, a low vibration of trolley cars, and the occasional engine of a Ford Model A echoing off the brick walls, a sound that signals the world is still turning, even if it feels slow and heavy. The streets of Oklahoma City in this era are a tapestry of textures and forgotten sensations. Imagine the cobblestones underfoot, worn smooth by the passage of countless feet and heavy wagon wheels over the decades. They are slick with the mist tonight, reflecting the dim yellow glow of the street lamps like dark, polished jewels embedded in the earth. These lamps are spaced far apart, casting long, dramatic shadows that dance against the iron fences of the residential blocks. The fences themselves are cold to the touch, their black paint chipping away in small flakes to reveal the history of the iron beneath, oxidized by years of prairie wind and rain. As the mist clings to the metal, it forms small, perfect droplets that eventually merge and slide down toward the damp earth in a slow, silent descent. The sidewalk is composed of uneven slabs of concrete, some cracked by the persistent roots of ancient American elms that still stand guard over the neighborhoods, their bare branches reaching out like lace against the charcoal sky. You can hear the sound of your own footsteps, muffled by the dampness of the air, as you walk past the storefronts with their hand-painted signs and gold leaf lettering that has begun to peel at the edges. The air carries the faint, nostalgic scent of coal dust, mixed with the smell of wet wool from the heavy overcoats worn by those few souls still wandering the night. It is a sensory experience that grounds us in a specific moment of history, a time when the world felt both smaller and more mysterious. The iron gates of the nearby parks are locked for the evening, their latches clicking softly in the wind with a metallic finality. Every window we pass is a frame for a different life, most of them dark now, save for the occasional flicker of a kerosene lamp or the soft orange glow of a dying fire in a hearth. This is a city of shadows, but it is also a city of stories, where the silence of the night is a canvas for the memories of those who lived through the hardest of times. The gutters are alive with the sound of water rushing toward the drains, a liquid music that fills the gaps between the distant sounds of the city. The bricks of the buildings are cold and rough, holding the dampness of the mist within their porous surfaces. There is a sense of permanence here, a feeling that these streets have seen everything and will continue to stand long after the mist has cleared. In this quiet, atmospheric landscape, we find ourselves contemplating a mystery that seems to defy the laws of physics and the strictures of authority. It is the story of the impossible field trip. We often think of prison as a place of absolute containment, a world defined by high walls, iron bars, and the constant, watchful eyes of the state. It is a world where every minute is accounted for and every movement is tracked. But in 1938, The boundaries were thinner than they appeared, and the system was prone to strange, inexplicable lapses. How could a man be in two places at once? How could a prisoner leave his post, travel across a state line to commit a crime, and then return to his bunk before the count was ever taken? It sounds like a ghost story, a piece of folklore told by inmates in the dark to keep the hope of freedom alive. Yet, the clinical records of the time tell a different tale, one that challenges our understanding of justice and the strange rhythms of the past. As the night deepens and the rain continues its steady vigil against your window, we will explore the threads of this impossible journey. We will see how a man named Joe Crowe managed to step through the cracks of the world, only to find that the past always has a way of catching up, no matter how fast you drive or how far you go. Before we move further into the shadows of these accounts, it is important to take a moment to remember that these are not just characters in a distant play. They were real people with families, dreams, and the same quiet fears that we all carry in the dark. We speak the names of Wayman Stallcup and Zellie Riley not for the sake of excitement, but to honor their memory and the lives they lived. Their stories were cut short by the very rhythms of the past we are exploring tonight, and by telling them, we ensure that they are not forgotten. We approach their history with a deep respect and a gentle curiosity, seeking to understand the unseen threads of justice that eventually wove their way through the chaos of their final moments. To understand Wayman Stallcup, we must understand the world of the WPA worker in 1938. The Works Progress Administration was more than just a government program. It was a lifeline for millions of men who had been cast aside by the economic collapse. Imagine the physical toll of that labor. The calluses on a man's hands were not just marks of work. They were badges of survival, thick and rough, from hours spent gripping the wooden handles of heavy shovels and picks. The weight of the shovel, the rhythmic thud of it hitting the earth, and the strain on the shoulders were the constant companions of men like Wayman. They worked in the heat of the Oklahoma summer and the damp chill of the winter, building the roads, bridges, and parks that we still use today. There was a quiet, stoic pride in that labor, the knowledge that even in the depths of the Depression, a man could still provide for his family. Wayman lived in a world where a paycheck, however meager, was a hard-won victory. He was a man of the era, defined by the rough fabric of his work coat and the sturdy boots that carried him to the job site every morning. He left behind a wife and two small daughters, Betty and Nancy, who waited for him in a home that was likely filled with the simple, mundane sounds of a family trying to make do. The smell of boiled coffee, the sound of a ticking clock on a wooden shelf, and the warmth of a small stove were the anchors of his life. When we look at the tragedy that befell him at 129 West Chickasaw Avenue, we must see it through the lens of a life that was built on the foundation of hard work and simple hopes. His death was not just a police report. It was a void left in a home that was already struggling to stay afloat. The house on Chickasaw Avenue was a one-room structure, a common sight in the poorer districts of the city. It was a place of cramped quarters and thin walls, where every sound was magnified and every secret was difficult to keep. Imagine the interior of such a home on a December night. The air would be thick with the smell of kerosene from a flickering lamp and the lingering scent of a simple meal. The draft would whistle under the door, a constant reminder of the world outside. In a room so small, the tension between men can become a physical presence, a heavy weight that fills the corners and makes the air hard to breathe. This was the setting for a confrontation that would leave one man dead and another claiming a desperate act of self-defense. We also encounter the figure of Apache Joe, a man whose life seemed to span the divide between the old world and the new. At 73 years old, he was a living link to a different time, a man who had seen the transition from the open plains to the crowded city streets. He lived in a trailer just 75 yards from the scene of the shooting, a small metal sanctuary filled with the tools of his trade. Joe was a worker in leather, and his hands were likely as tough and weathered as the hides he transformed into art. He was a man who found solace in the desert, a place where the silence is absolute and the stars feel close enough to touch. His belief in the restorative power of the desert and his ritual of the rattlesnake diet speak to a man who lived by his own rules, a man who saw the world with eyes that had looked upon the vastness of the Arizona horizon. Joe was a witness who didn't just see the events. He felt the rhythm of the night. He was a man who understood the desert, and he brought that same keen observation to the streets of Oklahoma City. When he stood on the witness stand, he wasn't just testifying. He was telling a story of what he had seen from the doorway of his trailer, a perspective that the jury would eventually have to see for themselves. His presence in the trial was a reminder that the truth often comes from the most unexpected places, from the quiet observers who live on the fringes of the story. Then there is the case of Joe Crowe, the man who performed the impossible. In November of 1938, the air near Fort Towson was crisp, and the water of the river was a slow gray ribbon winding through the landscape. Crowe was a prison trustee, a position earned through a perceived reliability within the system. He was a supervisor, a man trusted to oversee others as they worked on a dam project. The laxness of the era allowed for an honor system that seems unthinkable today. Imagine the moment Crowe decided to step away. The rhythm of the work, the sound of the machinery, and the presence of the other inmates all faded into the background as he found a car and began his unauthorized journey. The drive from Fort Towson to Paris, Texas, would have been a journey through a changing landscape. The tires would have hummed on the dirt roads, kicking up clouds of dust that settled on the fading autumn leaves. For those few hours, Crowe was a man in between worlds, neither a prisoner nor a truly free man. He held the steering wheel with the grip of someone who knew that his freedom was measured in miles, not years. The robbery he committed was a clinical act, a desperate grab for a few dollars that would ultimately lead to his undoing. But the most incredible part of his story was his return. He drove back across the border, resumed his position at the dam site, and was back in his bunk before the guards ever noticed his absence. It was a feat of timing and audacity that remains a singular anomaly in the records of the time. As we settle into the night, these stories begin to weave together into a larger narrative of justice and the human condition. We see the ingenious alarms of farmers in Nebraska catching chicken thieves with the simple snap of a mousetrap. We see the long, somber reflection of a man like Zellie Riley, whose life of service ended in a senseless act of violence by a neighbor he thought he knew. We see the tragic descent of Herbert Mullen, a man whose mind became a prison of delusions, and the heavy irony of Rex Brinley Jr., a plumber who could not fix the leaks in his own life. The rain continues to fall, a gentle, persistent reminder of the passage of time. The world of 1938 is gone, replaced by the silence of history. But the echoes of these lives still linger. We are the observers now, the ones who look back through the mist to see the shapes of the past. As you drift closer to sleep, let the details of these stories wash over you. The texture of the cobblestones, the smell of the wood smoke, and the sound of the rain are all part of a larger tapestry that we are uncovering together. You are safe in the dark, and the stories are a bridge to a time that is both strange and familiar. Let the weight of your body sink deeper into the mattress. The world outside is quiet, and the only task remaining is to listen and to let go. The threads of justice are long, and they often take decades to untangle. But in the end, the truth remains, a steady light in the darkness. We remember Wayman, Zellie, and Fern, and we honor the lives they lived. Their stories are no longer heavy. They are light, carried away by the rain and the soft breath of the night. Sleep is the final destination of our journey tonight, a place of absolute peace where the mysteries of the past are finally laid to rest. The cobblestones are slick, the street lamps are dim, and the city is finally finding its sleep. We will follow it there, one quiet thought at a time, as the rain carries us the rest of the way. The year is 1938, and the corner of West Chickasaw Avenue is a place where the shadows seem to linger longer than they should. The air is thick with the scent of the coming winter and the faint, acrid smell of coal smoke drifting from 100 nearby chimneys. Small houses line the street, their windows glowing with the dim, yellow light of kerosene lamps that struggle to push back the encroaching dark. In a room so small, there was no place for a secret to hide. Yet the truth remained shadowed by the smoke of the gun. The house at number 129 was a single room, a cramped space where every sound echoed and every movement was felt by those within its walls. Inside, the air smelled of boiled coffee that had sat too long on the stove, a bitter, metallic scent that clung to the heavy wool blankets draped over the chairs. A single kerosene lamp sat on a wooden table, its flame flickering slightly whenever a cold draft crept under the door, casting long, dancing shadows across the peeling wallpaper. There was a ticking clock on a wooden shelf, a steady, mechanical heartbeat that marked the passing of seconds in a world that felt like it was standing still. You can almost hear the soft whistle of the wind through the cracks in the window frame, a lonely sound that accompanied the low murmur of conversation between the men inside. The room was heated by a single iron stove, its belly glowing a dull red as it consumed the wood, the metal popping and creaking as it expanded in the heat. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, settling on the worn floorboards that had been scrubbed thin by years of use. Wayman Stallcup sat across from W.J. Edwards, his hands rough and calloused from the labor of the WPA projects that kept his family fed during these lean years. He was a man of 33, a father who worked with shovels and pickaxes to build the roads and bridges that connected a fracturing nation. His calluses were a testament to his dedication, the skin on his palms thick and yellowed. a physical map of the hard miles he had walked in the service of his wife and two small daughters, Betty and Nancy. These were children who were likely tucked into bed at that very moment, unaware that the rhythm of their lives was about to be irrevocably broken. The tension in the room was not a loud thing. It was a heavy, silent weight that settled into the corners like dust. There was an argument, or perhaps just the shadow of one. A low rumbling tension that broke with two clinical shots. Edwards would later claim he feared a robbery, that he saw a threat where perhaps there was only a tired man reaching for a seat. He admitted to the shooting immediately, his voice flat as he spoke to the officers who arrived in the misty Oklahoma night. The tension of the mystery is removed early, shifting our focus away from the act and toward the quiet tragedy of a family waiting for a father who would never return to the house on 11th Street. Just 75 yards away from that small, one-room house stood a trailer, a metal shell that served as a home for a man known only as Apache Joe. He was 73 years old, but he moved with a spryness that defied his years, his skin leathered and dark from decades spent under the sun. Joe was a worker in leather, and his trailer was filled with the rich, earthy scent of tanned hides and the sharp tang of the oils he used to keep them supple. Pieces of harness and strips of rawhide hung from the small metal hooks on the walls, swaying gently as the wind whistled through the gaps in the metal siding. Apache Joe believed in the rhythms of the earth, and every September he would return to the Arizona desert to participate in the ancient rites of the Apache tribe. It was there that he would gorge himself on rattlesnake meat and cactus, a diet he claimed was the secret to his longevity and his sharp, unclouded eyes. He kept several cans of that rattlesnake meat in his trailer, organized with a meticulous care that spoke of a man who knew the value of patience and preparation. The interior of his trailer was a world of organized silence, where every tool had its place and every scrap of leather was saved for a future purpose. In the quiet hours of that December night, Joe was not asleep. He was a man of the desert, accustomed to the silence and the subtle shifts in the night air. He heard the shots, a sound he knew well, and he looked out his window toward the Edwards house at 129 West Chickasaw. Through the mist and the dim yellow glow of the street lamps, he saw a body fall out of the door and onto the cold, hard ground. He watched as someone reached out from the shadows and pulled the body back into the house, a movement so deliberate it stayed with him for the rest of his life. The jury would later walk those same 75 yards, their boots crunching on the gravel and the frozen mud of the street, to see if it was truly possible for an old man in a trailer to see what he claimed to have seen. They stood where Joe had stood, looking through the same window frame, and they felt the same cold wind that had carried the sound of the shots. In the end, they believed the man who ate rattlesnakes and lived in the desert. They saw the truth in his weathered face and the steady, unwavering gaze of a man who spent his life watching the horizon. Joe knew the desert, and he knew the silence of the night. He was a man who saw what others chose to ignore, and his testimony was the thread that finally pulled the truth into the light. The water ran gray. The sky was heavy. A dam project near Fort Towson became the setting for an impossible journey in the autumn of 1938. Joe Crowe was a man familiar with the weight of iron and the boundaries of a prison cell. serving a 5-year sentence for armed robbery. But in November of that year, the boundaries of his world were softer than they had been in a long time. Crowe was a prison trustee, a supervisor of sorts who worked on the river project, where the labor was provided by men who knew the value of a day spent outside the walls. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and the slow churning water of the river, and the guards operated on an honor system that relied on the hope that a man would choose the safety of his bunk over the uncertainty of the road. Crowe, however, held a different vision of his future. He walked away from his post, his footsteps muffled by the soft, churned-up dirt of the construction site. He found a car, a machine that promised a temporary, stolen freedom, and he began a drive that would become a strange legend of the Oklahoma justice system. The road to Paris, Texas, was a winding path of dirt and gravel, and as Crowe gripped the steering wheel, he felt the vibration of the tires through his very bones. He drove through the changing colors of the autumn leaves, the deep reds and burnt golds of the oaks and maples blurring into a streak of fire against the gray, overcast horizon. The rhythm of the tires on the dirt road was a hypnotic song, a reminder that every mile he put between himself and the dam was a victory over the clock. He watched the fence lines go by, the wooden posts standing like silent sentinels over the empty fields. He was a man who knew his freedom was measured in miles, not years, and he savored the feeling of the wind through the open window. He reached Paris and walked into a gas company office, where he took $20 at the point of a suggestion. It was a small sum, a desperate act by a man who knew his time was short and his options were few. And then, in a move that defied every logic of the criminal mind, Joe Crowe turned the car around. He drove back across the border, back toward the dam, and back into the life he had tried to leave behind. He was back in his bunk before the count, his breathing steady, his eyes closed as if he had never left the site. The only trace of his unauthorized field trip was a photograph that would later appear in the newspapers, marked with a clinical X on his forehead by an editor who wanted to highlight the man who had stolen a few hours of the world. He held the steering wheel with the grip of a man who knew his freedom was measured in miles, not years. The wind was cold. The night was dark. In March of 1931, the plains of Nebraska were gripped by the desperate hand of the Great Depression. Jake Voland walked toward a chicken coop on a farm near Shelton, unaware that a simple piece of wire was waiting for him in the shadows. 10 chickens were a small fortune in those days. A year's worth of freedom traded for a few pounds of meat and the hope of a meal. Mr. and Mrs. Dale Stubblefield knew the value of their flock, and they had built a defense out of the mundane objects of their daily farm life. They had set a mouse trap near the barn door, a simple spring and a piece of wire connected to bells that hung in their bedroom and their living room. It was an ingenious alarm, a mechanical secret waiting for a heavy footfall in the dark. When Voland stepped into the coop, the silence of the Nebraska night was shattered by a tiny, metallic snap that echoed through the wooden structure. The bells began to ring, a frantic, rhythmic sound that woke the Stubblefields from their heavy sleep. Voland fled into the darkness, dropping his booty and running into the vast, open emptiness of the plains where the wind offered no place to hide. In his haste, he left his car behind. a silent witness sitting by the side of the road with the engine cold. He made his getaway on foot, his heart pounding against his ribs as he tried to outrun the consequences of a desperate act. The sheriff found the car and traced it back to Voland, who claimed it had been stolen by someone else for the purpose of the raid. But the jury saw through the thin veil of his story, recognizing the desperation of the era, but also the ingenuity of the farmers. A simple spring and a piece of wire were all it took to catch a man who thought the darkness was his friend. Trust is fragile. Fences are thin. In 1973, the citrus groves of Orlando were being replaced by the concrete and neon of a city finding its new identity. Zellie Riley was a man of 81, a leader who had spent his life fighting for the dignity of others in a world that often sought to deny it. He lived on a quiet street where the neighbors knew each other's names and shared the shade of the ancient oak trees that lined the sidewalks. James Dupree. Henry lived right next door, a man who shared a fence and a history with the man he would eventually betray for $64. Trust is a fragile thing, often broken by the very people who share our fences and watch our homes. On March 23rd, the quiet of the neighborhood was broken not by a sound, but by a cold, calculated act of violence that left a community in mourning. Henry entered Riley's home looking for a fortune, but he found only a small amount of cash and a few credit cards. The scene was one of tragic stillness. Riley was bound to a chair, a gag placed in his mouth, his dignity stripped away by a man he had called a neighbor for years. Henry was caught and offered a deal for a life sentence. But he chose to take his chances with a trial, perhaps believing that the shadows of his own history would protect him from the ultimate price. 10 years passed on death row, a long decade of appeals and legal maneuvers that sought to find a reason for the violence. A psychiatrist suggested that Henry suffered from brain damage, a medical hypothesis that the courts ultimately rejected as a reason to stay the execution. On the night before he was put to death in 1984, Henry requested a dozen oysters with hot sauce and crackers for his last meal. He had never tasted an oyster before. And as he sat in the quiet of his cell, he experienced the strange, briny curiosity of a man trying something new on his final night. He tasted the sea for the first time, just as the shore was fading from his view. But the most intimate detail of his final days was the arrival of his mother, a woman he had not known for most of his life. Henry had been shifted from family to family as a child, never knowing the woman who brought him into the world until a week before his death. She read about his impending execution in the newspaper and traveled to the prison to find the son she had lost. In his time of need, she was there, a mother and a son meeting in the shadow of the electric chair. His final words were a profession of innocence, spoken into a microphone that failed to carry his voice to the witnesses who watched from behind the glass. He winked at his attorney, a final human gesture before the hood was dropped and the current was applied. The fog rolls. The redwoods stand. In the coastal town of Santa Cruz, the landscape is defined by a beautiful and unsettling silence that clings to the hills and the state parks. Herbert Mullen was once a young man with a bright future, a student voted most likely to succeed by his peers in the class of 1965. But that future was slowly eclipsed by the shadows of paranoid schizophrenia. a mind that began to hear the earth speaking in a language of blood. He developed a delusion that the earth required human sacrifices to prevent devastating earthquakes, a belief that was anchored in the significance of his own birthday. April 18th was the anniversary of the 1906 San Francisco quake, and Mullen believed he was the only one who could keep the ground from shaking beneath the feet of the people he loved. He wandered the redwoods and the quiet streets of Santa Cruz, seeking the blood he believed would appease the restless earth. He took the lives of 13 people, including a priest, a college student, and 4 young boys who were simply trying to enjoy the peace of a state park. He tried to bargain with the earth, forgetting that the ground beneath us asks for nothing but our footsteps and our respect. Eventually, the sacrifices ended in a prison cell at Mule Creek, and the earth remained still, indifferent to the blood that had been shed in its name. Pipes carry water. Pressure builds slowly. In the Oklahoma town of Tahlequah, the year 1971 was marked by the influence of a man who dealt in the hidden mechanics of the city. Rex Brinley Jr. was a plumber and the owner of a nightclub called the Library Club, a place where the neon light of the sign flickered in the dark and the smell of stale beer hung heavy in the air. He was a man of influence, a man who dealt in pipes and pressure, never realizing that the greatest pressure was the one building within the walls of his own story. He was a suspect in the theft of a pickup truck, and a witness named Don Bolding was prepared to testify against him in a court of law. A bomb was planted in Bolding's truck, but it was his wife, Fern, a kindergarten teacher, who turned the key in the ignition that morning. The explosion was a massive dose of overkill, a violent act that took a woman who spent her days in a classroom filled with the scent of crayons and construction paper. Brinley was convicted and sent to prison, where he would escape twice, once during a riot and once through the sheer force of his own will. He spent 38 years maintaining his innocence, a plumber who couldn't fix the leaks in his own life, eventually passing away in the quiet of a prison infirmary. The silence that follows a life ended in the custody of the state is a heavy and particular kind of quiet. It is the sound of a file finally being slid into a metal cabinet. The metal-on-metal screech muffled by the sheer volume of other stories surrounding it. When Rex Brinley Jr. breathed his last in that infirmary, the decades of tension and the echoes of that massive explosion in Bristow finally began to settle into the floorboards. The world outside continued its frantic pace, but within the walls of the archives and the memories of those who remained, the dust began its long and inevitable descent. There is a profound stillness in an empty courtroom after a trial has concluded, and the years have turned the transcripts yellow. Imagine, if you will, the high ceilings of an Oklahoma courthouse in the middle of the night, long after the lawyers and the witnesses have gone home. The mahogany benches, polished by the nervous shifting of 1,000 different people, sit in the dark like silent sentinels. The brass railings that once felt cold under the palms of those awaiting their fate now catch the faint, silver light of a distant moon. In this space, the air is thick with the ghost of every word ever spoken in the pursuit of truth. If you were to stand in the center of that room, you would hear the building breathing. The wood expands and contracts with the changing temperature, creating small, sharp ticks that sound like the hands of a clock moving toward an inevitable conclusion. There is a fine layer of dust that coats the edge of the judge's bench, a microscopic record of time passing. This dust is composed of everything: fibers from wool coats worn during the Depression, skin cells of jurors who sat in judgment of Apache Joe, and the infinitesimal fragments of paper from the very records we have explored tonight. It settles slowly, drifting through the shafts of moonlight like tiny, silent stars, landing on the heavy law books that line the walls. These books are bound in thick leather, their spines cracked from decades of being pulled from the shelves. They contain the rules by which we try to make sense of the chaos of human nature. Inside their pages, the story of Joe Crowe is reduced to a series of citations and statutes. Stripped of the red Oklahoma dirt and the smell of the river near the dam site, the impossible field trip he took, that stolen drive toward the Texas border, is now just a footnote in the history of prison administration. But here in the quiet, we can almost feel the vibration of the tires on that old dirt road. We can sense the internal monologue of a man who knew his freedom was a borrowed thing. A few hours of wind in his hair before the iron gates claimed him once again. The impossible stories we have gathered tonight are no longer puzzles to be solved. They have been woven into the fabric of the past, settled and smoothed by the passage of time. The mystery of how a man could be in two places at once, or how a desert wanderer could see through the dark to find justice, has been answered by the records and the memories we have shared. Justice, however strange its rhythm, and however long its delay, has found its way to the quiet corners of Chickasaw Avenue and the open plains of Nebraska. We think back to Apache Joe, the man who knew the desert and the silence of the night. He was a man who lived in the spaces between worlds, carrying the ancient rites of the Apache into the modern hum of Oklahoma City. His testimony was the turning point, a bridge between the seen and the unseen. The jury walked the ground he walked, looking through the same air he breathed, and they found the truth waiting for them there. His trailer is gone now, and the rattlesnake meat he believed gave him his strength has long since returned to the earth. But the weight of his words remains in the archives. He was a witness not just to a crime, but to the fact that nothing truly stays hidden if someone is willing to look. The house on Chickasaw Avenue, once a cramped one-room stage for a mundane tragedy, has been reclaimed by the city. The smell of boiled coffee and the draft under the door are gone, replaced by the neutral scent of the modern world. But as we drift closer to the end of our journey, we hold a space for those who lived there. We remember Wayman Stallcup, the WPA worker who walked home with calloused hands and a heart full of the simple needs of his wife and two small daughters. We remember Zellie Riley, whose dignity was a shield he carried through a life of service, a man who believed in the goodness of his neighbor until the very end. And we remember Fern Bolding, the kindergarten teacher whose classroom once smelled of crayons and hope, a life cut short by a pressure she never invited. Their stories are no longer heavy. We have lifted them from the yellowed pages and the cold transcripts, and in the telling, we have allowed them to become light. They are like the mist that begins to form over the Oklahoma hills as the temperature drops. They are carried away by the rain, drifting over the Sunny Lane Cemetery and the quiet streets of Orlando, returning to the atmosphere from which they came. The tragedies are settled. The questions are answered. The tension that once gripped these lives has been released, leaving behind only the soft, rhythmic sound of the world continuing to turn. The rain against your window pane is changing now. The heavy, rhythmic drumming is softening, turning into a light, silver mist that clings to the glass. It masks the street lamps, turning their yellow glow into soft, blurred orbs of light. The world outside is receding, pulling back into the shadows to allow the night to take full command. The cobblestones and the iron fences of the past are fading, dissolving into the quiet of your room. The history we have walked through is folding itself up, tucking its secrets back into the drawers and the cabinets of the great library of time. You are safe in the dark. The weight of the day has settled into the mattress, leaving you light and unburdened. The stories are over, and the voices of the past have whispered their final truths. There is nothing left to solve, nothing left to wonder about, and nothing left to carry. The path ahead is clear and soft, leading into a deep and restorative stillness. The sound of the mist is a lullaby, a gentle reminder that the world is at rest and you are permitted to join it. The courtroom is empty now. The dust has settled on the mahogany and the brass. The lock has turned in the heavy wooden door, and the building is silent. The archives are closed, and the records are still. The night is long, and the air is cool. Let the memory of the dust carry you the rest of the way. Let the rhythm of the fading rain guide your breath. The stories have found their peace, and now so can you. The world is quiet. You are safe. The path is clear. Sleep now. Good night. The shovel meets the earth with a dull, heavy thud. It is 1938 in Oklahoma, and the ground is stubborn, resisting the blade with a cold, packed density. Wayman Stallcup knows this resistance well. It is a familiar weight that travels from the iron blade, up the worn wooden handle, and into the calloused palms of his hands. His calluses are thick now, a map of the miles he has moved one scoop at a time, season after season. This is the rhythm of the Works Progress Administration, a steady, grinding pulse that defines the lives of men who have little else but their strength. It is the sound of 1,000 men breathing in unison against the vast, quiet backdrop of the plains. The air in December is sharp and thin, carrying the scent of dry, brittle grass and the metallic hint of coming snow. Wayman adjusts his grip, his fingers feeling stiff and wooden inside work gloves that have seen better years. There is a quiet, heavy pride in the ache that settles between his shoulders. Each shovel of dirt is more than just labor. It is a promise kept to Betty and Nancy, his 2 small daughters waiting in the warmth of a home he provides for. It is the milk on the wooden table and the coal glowing in the belly of the stove. The Great Depression has a way of making a man appreciate the gravity of his own strength, turning the simple act of digging into a sacred ritual of survival. He stands in a trench that will one day be a road or a bridge, a permanent mark left by a man who is simply trying to outlast the winter. The wind whistles through the rough, frayed fabric of his coat, but he does not mind the chill. The movement keeps the blood flowing. The repetitive motion of lift, swing, and release creates a trance-like state, a meditation of the working class. Around him, the other men are shadows, in the early twilight, their voices low and sparse, muffled by the heavy earth. They do not talk of the future. They talk of the weight of the soil and the depth of the frost. When the whistle finally blows, the silence that follows is thick and heavy. Wayman cleans his blade with a piece of rough burlap, moving with a slow, deliberate care that borders on affection. His boots are caked with the red clay of Oklahoma, a heavy signature of his day's journey. He walks toward home, his shadow stretching long across the cobblestones that are beginning to glow under the dim, yellow haze of the street lamps. The transition from the raw earth to the city street is a gentle one. The humidity of the night feels like autumn, thick and clinging to the iron fences. He can smell the wood smoke from the nearby houses, a scent that speaks of safety and the end of the day's toil. The Arizona desert in September does not know the meaning of mercy. The heat rises from the pale sand in shimmering, translucent waves, distorting the horizon until the mountains look like dark water. Apache Joe stands in the center of this absolute stillness, his leathered skin absorbing the sun like the pages of an old, forgotten book. He is 73 years old. But here, time is an irrelevant, drifting concept. The desert is ancient, and so are the rites he has come to perform among his people. He listens for the warning. It is a dry, papery sound, a rhythmic vibration that seems to emerge from the earth itself. The rattlesnake does not hide its presence. It is a part of the landscape, a guardian of the heat and the stones. Joe moves with a spryness that defies his years, his feet finding the stable ground between the long, reaching cactus spines. He understands the delicate balance of this place. To eat the snake is to consume the desert's own resilience, to take its survival into his own body. He watches the Apache tribal rites unfold under a sky so blue it feels heavy, like a weight pressing down on the sand. The drums are a low, rumbling tension, a heartbeat that matches the slow pulse in his own temples. There is a specific, unmistakable smell to the desert during the rites. The scent of parched earth, bitter creosote, and the metallic tang of the sun hitting hot stone. He gorges himself on the white meat of the rattlesnake, believing it to be the secret to his longevity and his clear sight. It is a ritual of survival that has lasted for generations. He packs the remaining meat into small cans with a meticulous, steady hand, preparing for the long, quiet months in Oklahoma City. He knows the trailer on Chickasaw Avenue will feel small after the vastness of the Arizona sky. He carries the desert back with him in his bones. The sound of the wind through the metal siding of his trailer will always remind him of the whistling through the tall saguaro. He is a man who exists between two worlds, the leather worker in the city and the medicine man in the dust. When he sits in his trailer, surrounded by the smell of tanned hides and cactus supplies, he is never truly alone. He has the desert in his pantry and the rhythm of the rites in his memory. The kindergarten classroom is a cathedral of small, quiet things. It is a place where the air is perpetually scented with the sweet, waxy smell of crayons and the dusty, familiar aroma of construction paper. Fern Bolding moves through this space with a grace that is both quiet and certain. She understands the profound importance of the mundane. The small wooden chairs are tucked neatly under the tables, waiting for the arrival of children who see the world as a place of endless wonder. There are jars of white paste and safety scissors arranged with clinical, gentle precision. On the walls, Finger paintings in shades of bright primary colors depict houses with smoke curling from chimneys and suns with smiling, yellow faces. It is a world of innocence, insulated from the pressures and the shadows of the outside world. The silence of the room in the early morning is a soft, tangible thing. It is the sound of a space held in deep anticipation. Fern touches the edge of a small desk, her fingers lingering in the smooth, worn wood. She is a woman who deals in beginnings. She teaches the alphabet and the colors of the rainbow, building the foundation of lives she will only see the start of. There is a profound, quiet dignity in this work. The classroom is her domain, a sanctuary of learning and soft laughter. But when the door is locked and the lights are dimmed, the room takes on a different quality. It becomes a museum of potential and memory. The silence is no longer expectant. It is heavy and still. The chairs remain empty. The crayons stay in their boxes. The construction paper begins to fade in the long shafts of light that pierce the windows. It is a room waiting for a teacher who will never walk through the door again. The smell of the paste lingers, a ghostly reminder of projects left unfinished on the tables. The smiling suns on the wall continue to watch over the stillness, their bright colors a sharp contrast to the tragedy that has unfolded in the world outside. The classroom is a memory of a life dedicated to the small and the gentle, a place where the only pressure was the one used to stay within the lines of a drawing. The courtroom is entirely empty now, and the heavy oak doors have been closed for the final time. The dust settles slowly in the shafts of light, dancing in the quiet air like memories seeking a place to rest among the wooden benches. We have traveled through the unseen threads of justice, following the strange rhythms of the past from the one-room houses of Oklahoma to the desert plains of Arizona. The stories are no longer heavy. They have been told, recorded, and settled into the vast archives of time. Wayman Stallcup has found his peace in the Sunny Lane Cemetery, his life remembered not for the tragedy of its end, but for the quiet pride of his labor and the love of his family. Zellie Riley is honored for the dignity he carried throughout his 81 years, a leader whose legacy is far stronger than the violence that sought to silence him. Fern Bolding's classroom remains a testament to the gentleness she brought to the world, a teacher whose influence lives on in the children she once guided through the alphabet. The impossible field trip of Joe Crowe is now just a curious, faded footnote in a dusty ledger, a reminder of a time when the lines between freedom and confinement were blurred by the dust of a country road. Apache Joe has returned to the silence of the desert. His rattlesnake writes a part of the earth's eternal, shifting cycle. The loops are closed. The mysteries are solved. Justice, however strange and winding its path may have been, has finally been served. We remember the mothers who found their sons in the final hour and the families who waited through the long, dark years for the truth to emerge. Their stories are light now, carried away by the gentle mist that has replaced the heavy rain. The world is settling into a deep, restorative sleep. The cobblestones of Chickasaw Avenue are quiet and still. The metal siding of the trailers no longer whistles in the cold wind. You are safe in the dark, entirely removed from the urgency of the events we have described. The weight of the day has been lifted from your shoulders, replaced by the somnambulant pace of the night. The archives are still. The records are closed. Let the sound of your own breath be your only guide as you drift further away from the waking world. The path is clear. and the night is long. There's nothing left to do but rest. The stories are over. The silence is your companion. Sleep now. Good night.